G'day, mate. 40 here. So before I started writing on the pornography industry in the fall of 1995, and much of my writing over the next 12 years was about the commercial sex industry, I was fairly libertarian in my views. And since that experience, I've become much more traditional and conservative in my views. So I don't believe in wide, easy, universal access to vice, whether that vice is prostitution, whether it's pornography, gambling, marijuana. I really hate marijuana. I really, really hate marijuana. On the other hand, I am not someone who wants to just automatically ban all vice. I just think that civilization has an interest in restricting access to vice. And exactly where you draw the lines of restricting access to vice, I don't have a big argument. I simply recognize that we should create a society that encourages people to do the right thing and discourages people from doing the wrong thing. But with, say, access to marijuana, I don't want people put away for life for smoking a joint of marijuana. I just really hate marijuana. Access to pornography. So, for example, perhaps you should have to register. There should be a national register if you want access to pornography and prove that you are over the age of consent, or you have to register with your ISP. There should be just some, mildly onerous step that you have to take before you should be able to have access to pornography. If there was no stigma attached to prostitution, right, I think a lot more people would participate in prostitution. I think what holds a lot of women back is that they don't want the stigma. Mildly onerous. So I am not a big fan of Donald Trump's turn towards marijuana legalization. I think that's terrible. I'm not a fan of easy access to sports betting. Now, I was a big better. I was a bookie in high school. I recognize the appeal, and I recognize the Republican Party is now embracing vice voters, particularly young men. And this may be controversial. I want to stand up and say vice is bad. Vice is bad for society. And New York Times notes an emerging body of research suggests that recreational marijuana legalization causes enormous harms, right? Worse academic performance, more fatal car accidents, more homelessness, more hospitalization. What I see in my real life, that compared to everything else, right, marijuana is more likely to turn people into losers. Right? I see it again and again and again. Blokes who start using marijuana, right, they turn into losers. The smell is nasty. It's so widespread in San Francisco and Los Angeles. You walk around and there's that nasty smell. It's bad. Right? Marijuana is bad for you, and then you are more likely to create problems for wider society. And in my personal life experience, 50% of people who regularly use marijuana who are men turn into losers. I hate cryptocurrency. There is nothing that crypto does that we need it, right? We do not need crypto. So crypto speculation has cost plenty of Americans millions of dollars. There is no authentic, rational need for crypto. And okay, what the heck? Let me play something here. All right.
Old colleagues of mine, people that I used to gain succor and wisdom from on almost everything they said, are all sounding like screaming, hysterical, lunatic madmen. And I say this advisedly because what I read from them is we are now facing a constitutional crisis every day for the next 4 years. And aside from the fact that they are saying this while a president of the United States just offered a blanket pardon to his son that I think all read as a blanket pardon to himself, because some of it involves actions going back to when Joe Biden, was vice president and his son began obtaining filthy lucre as a result of his father's job. And as I think Matt keeps talking about, we got to see what's going to happen with his brother Jim, Biden's brother Jim, who was also a participant in this matter. So that's kind of a constitutional crisis, but okay, let's leave that to one side. Here's what struck me in the news in the last 24 hours. So South Korea, one of our leading allies on the planet Earth, most important allies on the planet Earth, hedge against China, a representative of the world of commerce among like-minded democratic states, has a president, got not elected in 2022, didn't have really much of a parliamentary majority, couldn't get stuff through the parliament. So he announces martial law. Martial law is something in the South Korean tradition.
Okay, so Okra says, streaming for 15 years for hours at a time for less than a dozen viewers. Cold. Well, Fred, it's cold if your measurement of warmth is a maximum amount of attention. So if you optimize instead for telling the truth, then you get warmed by telling the truth. And so I have known popularity and I have known ostracism. I have had many days where I received well over 10,000 unique viewers to my website. I have had days where I was on 60 Minutes, Entertainment Tonight, Fox, ABC News, etc., and had millions of viewers. And that was nice, right? I would prefer to have 1,000 viewers than 6 viewers, but I'm not primarily optimizing for viewership, right? I optimize for truth, and I understand that that comes at a considerable cost to numbers. Also, I optimize for the quality of the viewer. I don't optimize for just bums in the seats, right? I would rather have 10 people with an average IQ of 120 than 1,000 people with an average IQ of 95. Okay, I hate the vices, and I'm not a big fan of Donald Trump becoming the president of Vice. All right, Vice is bad. Cryptocurrencies are stupid. Don't waste your money on them. Sports gambling legalization leads to increased rates of bankruptcy and ruined credit, particularly among young men. Pot and gambling are highly addictive, and a significant subset of users will use both of them compulsively. Right? So combine that with the free market, and you get addiction for profit. So big business makes more money hooking consumers and encouraging them to do more of the thing that is hurting them and others. So legal vice doesn't just let individuals do what they want. It also creates industries such as big tobacco and now big gambling, right, to sell people things that are bad for them. So vice is bad. Controversial statement. But here I stand. I can do no other. So help me God. Right. Mark Halperin was on the Smirkonish
Hey, gang,
podcast.
I love the holiday.
And if I could just fast forward past the bloody ads.
So I have something to make small
Conversations. Mark, great to have you back. Pete Hegseth's mom was on Fox and Friends this morning. Can that Hail Mary save his nomination?
Well, there's any number of things that have occurred, in the run up to your show this morning, and even while you've been on the air, that suggest a surge of support for him. Not just his mom going on Fox and Friends, but Vice President-elect Vance tweeting positively about him. Lots of his colleagues from Fox attacking the allegations. Some of the super MAGA folks attacking Ron DeSantis. Some super MAGA folks attacking senators, Joni Ernst and Lindsey Graham, which normally wouldn't be part of the playbook of trying to win the votes of senators. But it appears what he's trying to do now is show Donald Trump MAGA's for him. He's fighting. He told reporters on Capitol Hill just a little while ago that he talked to the president-elect this morning and the president-elect, and he agreed he was going to keep fighting. So my sources are very pessimistic about his chances. But if he can convince senators to say, don't oppose me now. If you want to oppose me after a hearing, do. But if you can get to a hearing, I think that's where their head's at right now. I'm not sure he'll make it, but they may get that forbearance from senators.
Are you surprised that Ron DeSantis would emerge as a potential backup?
Well, it's a bit surprising in the sense that, he's not been on good terms with Team Trump, including the incoming White House chief of staff. And it does put someone in office who, the Colin Powell rule, you don't really want to give a cabinet job to someone who will be difficult to fire. And for a variety of reasons, it might be difficult to fire DeSantis. But if you look at his resume, he's a very strong candidate for enacting the Trump, Musk, Ramaswamy mission at the Pentagon.
Okay, I've caught my breath. Let's review with you a book that I was reading today. I spent most of the day reading Vice is Darwinian. Yes, they are, but there are such huge externalities that I don't think it's worth the price. So I think we have a national interest in reducing vice. So I was reading today the Oxford Handbook of Moral Psychology. It came out in 2022, and there was a chapter on humor and morality. And I thought this is accurate. Where one is engaged humorously, one adopts a certain static state of mind, a way of seeing and being, a special mental set towards the world and one's actions in it that calls for nothing. Right? You just exist, you just enjoy. Right? It is very different from a serious goal-directed state. So when we laugh, we will often lose control of our normal ability to act voluntarily. We lose our ability to pursue our goals. Right? Our muscle tone decreases, and often we will cry, we will pee ourselves if we're sufficiently amused. And here's an example of some cultural differences with humor. Richard Wiseman's Laugh Lab. People from Ireland, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand prefer jokes implicating wordplay, such as patient says, "Doctor, I've got a strawberry stuck up my bum. Doctor, I've got some cream for that." Americans and Canadians, by contrast, prefer jokes that turn on a sense of superiority. So a Texan says, "Where are you from?" Harvard grad. "Come from a place where we do not end our sentences with prepositions." Texan. "Okay, where are you from, jackass?" So Europeans prefer surreal jokes and jokes about subject matter that makes Americans typically uncomfortable, such as jokes about death and marriage. Germans don't display preferences for any particular kinds of jokes. People who dislike complexity, novelty, or symmetry display a relative preference for incongruity. They like resolution humor. Those who have a strong preference for incongruity resolution relative to nonsense forms of humor also prefer simple art forms and simple patterns of dots on a card. Affiliate forms of humor tend to be more popular in collectivist cultures, which emphasize the interdependence among the members of social groups. Aggressive forms of humor more highly appreciated in societies where the needs of individuals take precedence over the needs of the group or the community. So that means societies like the United States. Laughing together is consistently cited by successful couples as something that promotes the strength of their relationships. Then there are evolutionary theories of humor. So perhaps laughter began in the sexy vocalizing that signaled victory in an aggressive conflicts among our male ancestors, and laughter still often functions as a dominant signal that's been updated to reflect the ways that our more complex linguistic capabilities have made it possible to defeat others in conversation. Then there is a sexual selection model for humor. When women tend to laugh more than men do, women tend to seek out men who make them laugh. Men tend to tell more jokes and to seek out women who will laugh at their jokes. So intelligence predicts humor ability. Humor ability predicts mating success, and men relative to females have more humor ability. So I would say that much of my ability with women has come from making them laugh. Now, what about your average comic? They tend to be more suspicious than the average person, more intelligent, more angry, and more depressed. The early lives of professional comics are typically characterized by intense feelings of isolation and deprivation. That rings true. I learned to make jokes to resolve all sorts of nasty negative feelings I had inside of me. So the family conditions that predispose to the development of fear of laughter, fear of social embarrassment, right? That's true for me. Characterized the early lives of professional comics. So comics tend to describe their mothers negatively, right? The mothers of children that go on to become professional humorists these mothers tend to be selfish, controlling, less kind, less likely to be intimately involved in the lives of their children than the average. So comic skills are often developed as a tool to cope with uncongenial family environments, as a way of dealing with feelings of anxiety and rejection and gaining the attention and approval of otherwise dismissive parents. So those who professionally seek out the laughter of others, right, they need that joy and validation. Self-disparaging forms of humor can often make other people quite uncomfortable, I've noticed, and they can facilitate depression. Professional comics score unusually high on measures of psychotic traits, even relative to other creative artists. So comic sensibilities develop probably as a way to cope, but does having a good sense of humor provide a good strategy for coping across the board? The ability to produce comedic material is strongly associated with premature mortality. So high ratings of a child's sense of humor predicts a greater likelihood of dying. There is an inverse relationship between comedic talent and longevity. And the funnier the comic, the more likely they die early. In comic duos, the funnier of the two comics is 4 times more likely to die prematurely, even after adjusting for differences in age. Then, next chapter I read is called Variations in Moral Concerns Across Political Ideology, Moral Foundations, Hidden Tribes, and Righteous Division. So, traditional conservatives, here's a definition of them. Description of this group is patriotic, religious, moralistic, tends to lament what it perceives as the gradual erosion of a bygone and glorified American way of life. They tend to believe that America is a fair society, that people's success is the result of hard work and effort rather than luck and circumstance. They strongly approve of Donald Trump. They tend to agree in traditional notions of American identity, such as having 2 American parents, speaking English, and being Christian. They tend to get their news from Fox and from talk radio. They are suspicious of traditional media. They believe it is biased in favor of liberal causes and tends to be anti-religious. Traditional conservatives' most important concerns are foreign tensions, jobs, and terrorism. Devoted conservatives. This group is highly active, highly engaged, uncompromising, and nationalistic. So I think this would be my viewers. Members of this group have a higher income than any other group. They feel significantly happier and more secure than the average American. They are staunchly supportive of Donald Trump and his America First policies, including a ban on travel from Muslim-majority countries and a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. They oppose compromise. They are the most likely to believe there is a need to defeat the evil within our country. They feel the most pride in the American flag. They are deeply loyal to the ideals for which it stands. Their most important issues are immigration, terrorism, jobs, and the economy. So if you have a strong in-group identity, right, you belong intensely to a tribe, this will predict your political views better than self-identified political labels. So support for building a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border wall, better predicted by strong in-group identity than by self-identified ideology. Same is true for overall approval of Donald Trump and for beliefs that racism and sexual harassment remain a serious problem in the United States. When predicting concern for each of the moral foundations, tribal membership does a significantly better job at predicting 4 out of the 5 moral foundations: purity, authority, loyalty, and fairness, than self-identified ideology. The one exception is harm, where there's no significant difference. So people on the right care about purity, authority, loyalty, and people on the left care intensely about fairness and harm reduction. People on the right care about those things too, but they care about purity, loyalty, and authority just as much. So tribal membership is a powerful predictor of explicit political attitudes. So the unlikely election of Donald Trump in 2016 revealed the hidden tribes in America that are most susceptible to his message. Endorsement of the CARE Foundation for Morality closely correlates with the view that hate speech is a real problem in America and that sexism is pervasive. So if caring for others is a primary moral foundation for you, then you probably want to ban hate speech. If fairness is your moral foundation, right, you're likely to believe that women are paid less solely because of their gender and that the world is a dangerous place. Endorsement of the Loyalty Foundation correlates with pride in the American flag and feeling as though being American is central to one's identity. The Authority Foundation associates with support for the Muslim travel ban and the view that the police should be more protected than Black Lives Matter activists. Endorsement of the Purity Foundation comes with opposition to gay marriage and the view that changing attitudes towards sex are causing America to lose its moral foundation. So if you are highly sensitive to threats, that correlates with attitudes as support for the Muslim ban, support for the US-Mexico border wall. Parenting style, right? Devoted conservatives are 3 times more likely to endorse authoritative as opposed to permissive parenting values. For example, preferring good manners to curiosity and respect for elders to independence. Endorsement of authoritative parenting principles positively predicts a whole slew of political opinions, including opposition to gay marriage, being pro-life in the abortion debate, and believing that people's gender is fixed at birth. 86% of progressive activists believe that people's lives are determined by forces outside their control. 98% of devoted conservatives believe that people are largely responsible for their own outcomes in life. Because I believe in the power of genes and early imprinting, I think I'd be in the middle, but if I tipped in either direction, it would be more to forces outside their control because your genetics are not within your control. Right. If you believe that people's lives are determined by forces outside their control, you're more than twice as likely to support expanding the government safety net and to want to take in more refugees and to believe that women are discriminated against in the workplace. Conservatives believe it's only through a disciplined and effortful adherence to pre-established obligations, including one's family, one's country, one's religion, and existing laws and traditions, that the individual may become a good and moral person. To liberals, true personal success is achieved not by taming the inner spirit, but by cultivating and freeing it. So for people on the right, their mantra tends to be do your duty. For people on the left, their mantra tends to be, I'm blanking, but follow your bliss. So progress for people on the left comes from releasing people from pre-existing moral obligations and allowing them to pursue their own authentic path of self-expression. So if you have the moral foundation of care, your sacred values are nurturing, care, and peace. Your sacred objects are innocent victims and nonviolent leaders such as Gandhi and Martin Luther King. You see what is evil as cruel and violent people. And if you engage in idealistic violence, it'd be killing of abortion doctors or weather underground bombings. If you have the moral foundation of fairness, you believe in justice, karma, reciprocity. Your sacred objects are the oppressed and the unavenged. Evil people are racists, oppressors, and capitalists. And if you engage in idealistic violence, it'd be vengeance killings and reciprocal attacks and feuds. If your moral foundation is loyalty, right, your sacred values are self-sacrifice for the group. Sacred objects, the homeland, nation, flag, ethnic group. What are evil? What is evil? Traitors, outgroup members, and their culture. If you engage in idealistic violence, it would be in the form of ethnic grudges, genocides, violent punishment for betrayal. If your moral foundation is authority, then you value respect, tradition, and honor. Sacred objects are authorities, social hierarchy, traditions, institutions. What is evil are anarchists, revolutionaries, subversives. And if you engage in idealistic violence, it'd be right-wing death squads, military atrocities, or Abu Ghraib. If you have the moral foundation of purity, you believe in chastity, piety, and self-control. Your sacred objects are the body, the soul, the sanctity of life, and holy sites. People who are evil are those, the atheists, the hedonists, and the materialists. And if you engaged in idealistic violence, it would refer to religious crusades, genocides, and killing. Okay, triggers, right? Hunter Biden had to be pardoned because if he wasn't pardoned, he might fall into getting triggered. I don't believe in triggers. Triggers are BS. They're fine in the early stages of recovery. But once you work the program, once you are recovered, right, you should be largely immune from triggers. You should be able to create a life where you can lead a good, holy, productive life. You shouldn't need to be thinking about triggers once you have embarked on the work of recovery. So my general view is triggers are BS.
That's what would really, I think, for the American people, And it's why, by the way, we're hearing a lot of, oh, I'm worried it would trigger, he's been sober. If he has to get sentenced and go to prison, it'll re-trigger his addictions. This would be so bad for the whole family. I'm like, yeah, you know what? Addicts get sent to prison all the time, and it's really bad for them too. Why is Hunter special? But I do think that's why we're seeing the family man, former addict, sort of soft sell on this pardon, when in fact it's a corrupt and dirty business.
It's the same old story with this guy.
Yeah.
Don't criticize me because of my tales of woe, right? And look, Biden has suffered terrible tragedy in his life, but that's what it always comes back to whenever he is under criticism is, don't talk to me about this or that because look at how I've suffered. Whether it's Bo, now it's Hunter. Don't question what I'm doing with Hunter because you could cause him to relapse. Well, here's my suggestion. As Tom Cotton has been pointing out, when you are pardoned by the president, you have to testify. You cannot use your Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. And so I think Hunter should be called to testify. And yes, as I just said, there are plenty of questions to be asked about the Biden family business. But I have one more question, and that is, where did that cocaine come from in the White House? Mr. Hunter Biden, you were under oath. You have to.
Well, somebody said
you're pardoned from possession because it's covered under the pardon.
Right.
So answer that question.
That's right. He can't. Somebody had mentioned that the other day, right? He can't plead the Fifth.
No.
If he's called to testify, he can't plead the Fifth anymore because of how blanket the pardon is. One thing about how bad this was for Democrats is the late night. They got the late night headlines. Like Jimmy Kimmel concedes Biden promised not to pardon Hunter, but quote, there's a very good chance he doesn't remember. So, Jimmy Kimmel's making fun of him. Jon Stewart, rule of law is all that separates us from the entire cast of Madagascar. I don't know the context of why Jon Stewart is talking about a cartoon movie about.
All right, let's talk about topic number one that I know is on your mind right now. Epistemic coercion. So I just realized over the past few months that words such as freedom, concepts such as freedom, mean nothing unless you know the particular hero system to which they are attached. And apparently I was influenced by something that Carl Schmitt had written. And Carl Schmitt wrote in 1932, words such as state, republic, society, class, as well as sovereignty, constitutional state, absolutism, dictatorship, economic planning, neutral or total state, and so on are incomprehensible if one does not know exactly who is to be affected, combated, refuted, or negated. So that is a good thing to keep in mind when you're struggling to understand how language is being used, right? Who is affected by this language? Who is combated? Who is refuted? Who is negated? So the word political, right? Often that is a dirty word, and your adversary wants to be designated as non-political in the sense of harmless and pure. Or you may want to disqualify or denounce him as political to portray yourself as non-political in the sense of purely scientific, purely moral, purely aesthetic, purely economic, or on the basis of some other similar purity and therefore superior. I was reading a biography of Milton Friedman, and one of the blokes who most influenced him was a University of Chicago economist, free market economist by the name of Frank Knight. And this is what Frank Knight said in 1934 that I think Kip will appreciate. Domination will rest upon some mixture of force, the threat of violence, with psychological technique, propaganda, deception, fraud, and humbug. So modern developments of technology is referring to the radio, I think, at this point, and movies, right? And the science of psychology, in quotes, have together created a new basis for tyranny on the part of a group which, once it gets in a position to monopolize and control the press, the radio, and the media, under these conditions, a consensus may be consciously voluntary and yet forced or manipulated. Assent may be enthusiastic and yet not intelligent and hence not free. Men may be made to act in a prescribed way and also made to like it. So these concepts of tyranny, despotism, and exploitation have received an entirely new content, and the notion of liberty has become enormously more difficult to define. So a lot of these concepts don't make sense unless they are against the background of a particular hero system. And here's a quote from 1895. "The tyranny exercised unconsciously on men's minds is the only real tyranny because it cannot be fought against." So Stephen Turner, one of my favorite academics, he's a philosopher of the social sciences. He is using a new book called Science in a Free Society to discuss the regime of science and expertise, right? We're supposed to follow the science. And he notes that regimes of science and expertise are ineradicably political and coercive. Right? You can't escape epistemic coercion from a religious community to the secular community. Every community relies upon epistemic coercion. So epistemic refers to how do we know what we know. So we get to choose our regime, and how do we accommodate science with democracy? Right? We have to become disillusioned with the ideal of the purity of science and the neutrality of expertise. Right? We cannot valorize the science as a real institutional fact and then insist on following the science and not recognize that we are deviating significantly from our democracy. So during COVID, right, we saw the development and widespread use of knowledge suppression and epistemic engineering, both within science and with respect to expert claims within our nominally free societies. So what is the practical epistemic significance of new technologies such as the internet? And when big tech becomes coercive, right, is this good? Is this good for society? Is this coercion legitimate? The rationale for big tech's coercion, right, is that malinformation, misinformation, and disinformation are so pervasive in the digital world that they produce real-world harms. Remember, minimizing harm, then you're going to support more censorship. If minimizing harm is a key foundation to your hero system, you will be much more supportive of censorship. Right? I understand how many people say parents of daughters or people who just feel protective of women will be outraged by just the existence of a pornography industry and the ability of men to watch videos of double penetration and bukkake will cause them real world pain because they feel like it's harming women, just the very existence of porn. So cognitive security, that's when we have big tech and our social betters decide what information are we allowed access to. So now we learn more and more about the role of governments and drug companies in these interventions, in what we get to learn about COVID and the like. And so we see that these interventions cross whatever line exists between partisanship and scholarship, fact and value. And there wasn't usually sufficient evidence for many of these interventions to reduce openness of public discussion. So under COVID in medicine, we saw all sorts of direct coercion, the taking away of licenses of doctors for failing to abide by the establishment guidelines. We saw censorship based on particular definitions of misinformation, which were themselves based on policy agendas with very little evidence behind them. So these new novel instruments for epistemic control and coercion, perhaps we should think a little bit more about them. So affirmations of explicit beliefs, such as professions of faith, can be coerced. Right? There are things that you can coerce. And you have a couple of different basic forms of power, right? You have the power to command, and then you have the power to create the conditions of constraint that become unconsciously internalized as normal. I have unconsciously internalized YouTube's terms of service, not just when I'm doing a live stream, but as I walk through life, right? YouTube's terms of service are pretty much how I operate through almost all of my life. I've internalized YouTube's terms of service. So liberation is a term used against this kind of constraint, right? We get to be liberated from false consciousness about false standards regarding COVID, false evidence regarding COVID, false public policy with regard to COVID. We're learning more and more about how government has censored or encouraged censorship on big tech. So there is always power in persuasion and persuasion in power. So we judge what most of our knowledge, explicit knowledge, comes from other people. We judge what we are told by a combination of two variables: our assessment of the trustworthiness and motives of other parties and our assessment of their competence. And judgments about the credibility of the expert are ubiquitous in public policy, in science, and in institutions. So we tend to judge experts by their past success, by the endorsements they've received, right? The position that they have ascended to, the status of the journals that they have published in, the grants that they have received. And so this produces hierarchies of credibility and worthiness of attention, which cascade. And these hierarchies are, of course, power, a form of power. So exclusion and inclusion, along with favoritism for preferred persons or groups, are a form of epistemic coercion. They're not direct coercion, but they are a form of epistemic coercion. So power in science, right? There is the power to exclude, to not publish, to not hire, to not cite, to not endorse, to not fund, to not employ. There's the power to allocate scarce resources to, failure to attend to, and so forth, right? So there are many rewards for cognitive conformity and conforming to the standards of the ruling elite, right? These are all forms of censorship, right? These are ways of controlling and manipulating our cognitive environment. And these forms of censorship change our beliefs. They control the inputs that we unconsciously process as we learn. They control what scientists are aware of. And fear of criticism, right, stultifies and inhibits people. There's tremendous self-censorship out of fear of the consequences of failing to conform. And almost all of us are dependent upon a group and on an authority, someone who pays us, someone who has the ability to make our life easy or hard. So how do people get funding to do science? Right? What's called science is really a complex series of coercive decisions. There is the decision to fund. Scientists know that they are incredibly dependent upon funding, and they know that their careers will be ended and they won't get funding if they don't conform. So scientists censor their own colleagues for taking positions that the government opposes or for fear for their own grants. The status system of science pervades the choices that scientists make, which is another indirect form of coercion. Now, changing minds is very difficult. Silencing people is not difficult. Excluding people is not difficult. Right? The easiest point of coercive entry into the epistemic environment is at the moment of transmission. So prevent publication, delegitimate sources of knowledge, threaten people, threaten the speakers, ban people. These are all common means of exercising coercion, and they were lavishly employed during the COVID pandemic. So changing minds, very difficult. Silencing and excluding people, very simple. So if you can create the appearance of a consensus, this is epistemically coercive. It creates an epistemic atmosphere which misrepresents reality, that misrepresents what people are thinking. So if all the data has on what people are thinking is what is presented to you by the news media or by our institutions, this is a false picture. It normalizes what is only normal as expression rather than thinking. So when you join a profession or when you're trying to move up through your educational process, all right, you will be initiated into a particular paradigm that essentially requires blind acceptance of a great deal of rote learning and memorization to master the intricacies of your discipline. This is true of education in general. Right? Mastery comes slowly, and you have to essentially report back certain things to pass each level in your education or professional journey. So when you first had the printed book come along in the West, there was a great deal of anxiety and fear on the part of our rulers, and there's all these moves to license, to censor, and to control. Then you get the emergence of the internet, the emergence of social media, and this digital domain has produced similar anxieties and similar means of suppression. So we got a great deal of attention paid to algorithms used to control social media. These are a paradigm of the new form of epistemic coercion. They resemble the kinds of controls used in science. Right? The algorithms are anonymous. They are treated as unrelated to the exercise of power and unrelated to the self-serving motivations behind the algorithms. Justifications for the algorithms are related to harm reduction, the idea of the common good. So here are some basic means of epistemic coercion. Information deprivation. People don't know. This is model for censorship, but we call it curating. Right? We've got algorithm-based blocking of postings. We have AI that blocks all sorts of basic truths, such as that different groups have different gifts. All right? No AI of any standing will allow much discussion or development on the very basic truth that different groups have different gifts. So the gifts of Ashkenazi Jews are distinct from the gifts of West Africans, which are distinct from the gifts of the Japanese and Australian Aborigines. Then you have epistemic coercion in the form of normalizing and stigmatizing, right? Creating a climate of opinion, producing a consensus by providing greater access to means of communicating to certain viewpoints, right? You flood the public sphere or the media space with similar opinions and claims to create the impression that these particular claims and opinions are normal and counterclaims are suspect. And then you note that anyone making a claim outside of what's approved, that this comes from a small, problematic, stigmatized, deranged, and dangerous group. So you want to make the preferred opinion the default and raise the cognitive cost of challenging the default by making the default appear normal, standard, healthy, and what everybody thinks. So normalization is a variety of the nudge phenomenon. Right? We are nudged into more convenient ways of thinking and speaking and doing by our environment and by our media. Then you've got legitimating and delegitimating. Right? Information is difficult to suppress, so we've got a common strategy to delegitimate the sources and character of the information that must be suppressed. So we get the term conspiracy theory to marginalize ideas and information that cannot be disproved, but might even be true, but is threatening to those who are invested and who have the power to establish what's legitimate and what is illegitimate. So legitimation is a direct assertion by institutions and persons that a certain set of views are correct and another set of views are false and dangerous. So the institution, the community of science, the experts, public health authorities, legal authorities assert that they have special power to tell others what is correct, rational, and true. And these assertions will justify censorship, secrecy, and other kinds of information deprivation because the public cannot be expected to understand the activity being concealed. Right? These are the bases for a paternalistic approach where the people making the decisions, they are our superiors, they are cognitively superior to us. And one extreme form of this is the persecution of heretics. All right, back to Smerconish and Michael Smerconish and Mark Halperin.
Gone. So the personal side of it is a little bit confusing to me. I'm not sure he'll get it. I think the fact that he's being talked about suggested to me overnight that Donald Trump had largely moved on from Pete Hegseth, but it's a misunderstood element of Donald Trump's personality. He'll forgive anybody. He'll forgive anybody. It's all situational for him. So if he thinks Ron DeSantis is the best, now, because I know you like such things, I'll say there's talk that this would be a multiplayer deal and that Ron DeSantis would become Secretary of Defense in exchange for naming Trump's daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, to the Marco Rubio Senate seat, which is something that could happen anyway. But
You can't make it up. You cannot
people are
make this stuff up.
speculating about that. Yeah.
You know, the larger issue here, and I talked about it in the first hour of the program, and I have a lawyer who'll join me in hour 3 named Andrew Bakaj, and he's really carved out this niche for himself. He served in the Office of Inspector General for the CIA as an attorney, and he's the guy you call, Mark, if today your name is put forth and you're about to fill out all the forms and you want somebody to be your Sherpa. And the bigger question that I see here is one of the role of background checks or the lack of reliance on them by Trump in comparison to all of his predecessors, at least for those top level positions. Because if you're going to be put forth to get a security clearance and still have to undergo a check, that's going to play itself out, but not if you're at the level of a cabinet secretary as things stand now.
Well, I'm a little confused as to where things stand now. On the one hand, it seems like, from the press release that Susie Wiles, the incoming chief of staff, agreed to the normal process, which Republican senators have largely asked for, which is the FBI does these background checks. But then I don't have this myself, but I've seen various reports that say, no, some people are still going to want private background checks. Some people are going to wait and not do their background checks till Trump has taken over the FBI. So I'm not really sure where it stands. Look, I respect people going to public service, including the FBI, but if you look at history, their background checks are not always perfect. They miss stuff. Their reports are often used for political purposes. So I think it's easy for the Trump folks to say, we're not trying to get rid of a perfect system. We're just trying to get rid of an old system. And in Trump world, old is not necessarily good.
This is the Smirconish Podcast from SiriusXM.
Stop that, man. I'm trying to produce a high-quality show here. I don't need all your bloody ads. Right? People want to learn more about epistemic coercion. Right? There's gaslighting. Right? That's exclusion by ignoring in situations where discussion and exchange are expected. And this is the basis for the legitimacy of the process of consensus building. We've got compelled speech, such as diversity statements, oaths, formulaic speech, right? So they're expected to have a behavioral technology designed to produce changes in thinking in the subject's mental processing through involuntary adaptation, especially the kind of ritualized speech, which produces some kind of commitment to the compelled statements or language through repetition, and the reduction in cognitive dissonance that comes with believing what you are saying. There's deprogramming, where you use social pressure to break down belief systems, and there is pollution, where people get cognitively overwhelmed by the need to deal with too much information that is difficult to assess or assimilate. Then there are means of resistance to epistemic coercion, such as this show. So we have protective self-censorship, evasion of issues, and conformism as the normal responses to coercion. Resistance to epistemic coercion is still possible. So you've got purification or neutralization. So you reinterpret everything through the concept of purity, and you recognize that all thought is ideological, that all thought is standpoint dependent, and that there is no truth other than the truth of the validity of the standpoint, such as your standpoint is Orthodox Judaism or Christianity. So you can purify your thinking. So there's no truth outside of libertarianism, outside of Christianity, outside of Islam, outside of human biodiversity. Not many people believe in value-free science anymore. Then there are other methods of intellectual resistance. Right, we've got transparency, where administrative secrecy and obscurity is a traditional form of epistemic control. But through transparency, we can learn more and more about what's really going on. We've got information tribalism. That's where we look at the world from the perspective of our tribe, and we will not submit to any other form of truth. We are most vulnerable collectively when our collectivity is homogeneous, when we're all part of the same tribe, right? Then we have an ease of mutual understanding. We have an easy ability to build on that understanding that is not shared by other people outside the tribe. This comes at a high price. We are vulnerable to epistemic coercion and manipulation of our cognitive environment by our tribe. Then there is diversity. So if you are hearing from more sources of information, perhaps that will break through the epistemic coercion. Increased free speech. And then there is disorganized skepticism. So skepticism within the limits and outside the limits of science. So liberalism has a traditional bias against and a horror regarding coercion. But to maintain a liberal society, you have to employ epistemic coercion. So some people will say that you have to epistemically coerce those who are not fit for epistemic autonomy. That some people are too weak, too stupid, too easily misled, too epistemically dependent on the wrong sources to exercise autonomy. But the illusion of autonomy may be a useful tool. It might make them feel as though they own the correct way of thinking, that it's their choice and that they are responsible. So when it comes to curation and the algorithm and the manipulation of our cognitive environment, that leaves us with the illusion of freedom within a cognitive environment that is controlled in ways that are hidden from us. So this is the new form of technology that is both the most opaque and difficult to resist. We are coerced unobtrusively in the course of doing something else, such as browsing social media or searching for information, where we are unaware of what is being withheld, promoted, or presented in a context designed to make it more plausible. So this algorithmic technology serves to normalize, to suppress, and to familiarize. When there is authority, there is epistemic privilege, there is the power to exclude, and this will always come with the risk of abuse and vulnerability to error. The concept of disinformation is an acknowledgement of our special epistemic vulnerability in the new digital world. It is a new novel form of coercion based on a novel form of authority over what is treated as true. Not only does it have the potential for abuse, it has already been abused. It is a new inquisition and a new response to heresy with new tools of coercion. And these tools are neither transparent nor validated from the outside. Have you found that essay as thrilling as I did?
About news I only watch, so I...
News. In the wide world of news today, you write, for reasons that no one I know can fully explain, at Mar-a-Lago, this swirling, curling, whirling dervish of a moment in the transition is known as Wednesday. Where are we big picture with the Trump transition?
You know, it's one of the great mysteries of Donald Trump. It's partly a mystery. There are things you can explain it with, but he like Bill Clinton, he just survived stuff that no political mortal could survive. And if you look at what's going on, you know, his Secretary of Defense pick in under the gun, the guy who was supposed to be the sort of quarterback of tariffs, apparently not taking a job in the administration, this controversy over the background checks, disagreements between Republicans about how to go forward with the tax and other spending bills. There's all sorts of things happening. You know, DEA nominee withdrawing, you know, in a blink of an eye. For a normal transition, the framing of this would be transitioning crisis. You know, where's Trump? He's not on camera. What's going on? There's none of that. It's all people just sort of accept the method to the madness and are sort of intrigued by the fact that he's not on camera and assume that, unlike a normal president-elect who, if one or two cabinet nominees went down, there'd be this crisis of confidence and questions about competence and all that stuff. It's just not there. So they put out a press release yesterday that was somewhat hyperbolic, but it said, look, on these 5 big fronts, on the border, on tariffs, on the economy, on security, forget what the 5th one was, he said Trump's already making progress. And there's something to that. The weird combination of Trump off camera, but very active on social media, very active through his surrogates, doing stuff as if he's practically president. And the diminishment of Joe Biden, even before the Hunter Biden thing, the old saw, there's only one president at a time. You could make a case that we do only have one president now, and it's Trump, even though he's not taking the oath of office.
Relative to Hunter, in today's wide world of news, you say the search continues today by the Wall Street Journal to explain the why of the Hunter pardon.
Let's get,
but my initial reporting...
Kip onto the show. Kip, what's going on, man?
Oh, man, I couldn't resist calling in tonight with this topic. The worst thing, Luke, I think about being manipulated from on high is the way I catch myself editing my own thoughts. Oh, it makes me so mad at myself, Luke. Tell me you run into that too, where you catch yourself doing that.
Editing my own thoughts.
Yes.
I guess I have a sense, in the sense that, if I ever expressed what I'm thinking right now, that'd be very dangerous for my well-being. Yes.
If you're filtering your Weltanschauung on the YouTube, terms of service or whatever.
Yeah.
You see the way that's creating a grid over what you're allowed to actually broach and not broach, unless somebody gives you a wink or throws you up a swastika or some way cues you in that a certain subject is able to be talked about. That's the worst facet about it, because it means that the shit works. You know what I mean? If it's jumping into my brain, then I know it's jumping into everybody's brain, because I swear I'm on guard for it, and everybody else is having to work and 40 hours a week or whatever. I feel like they're just along for the ride, like on a Ferris wheel. You know what I mean? And that's why a lot of the stuff you were talking about tonight does upset me, because they don't have a chance. If they're lucky, they're so busy trying to make their truck payment and rent or whatever that they can't get caught up in that 86% of BS that swirls around. So it's unfortunate. It makes me wonder if previous generations lived this way. Luke, you think this is a 20th century phenomenon?
Well, there are two things that are always true. There are some things that are unique to the moment, and there are some things that go back in time. So there's every society has had substantial amounts of epistemic coercion. We have new forms of epistemic coercion these days because we have new technology.
I noticed after talking with you that Mr. Benz has a YouTube page, and he has 7,000 subscribers, just like you. And he gets 1,000 or less. He's criminally underwatched, just like you. You know what I mean? So I don't know if that'll make you feel better or worse.
Yeah. Don't. I mean, I like Mike Benz. So.
Right. Gosh, I wish now, but after talking with you, I feel like I'm gonna have to view him suspiciously. You know what I mean, Luke? You made me feel the same way about Mr. Cooper. You remember you said a few things
Daryl
about
Cooper, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I didn't really know who Martyr May was, but they really act like he stepped on a turd whenever he talked about Churchill unceremoniously or whatever. That was his unpardonable sin that got his name in 15 minutes of fame or whatever, right?
No, it wasn't. It was overall what he said combined with his background. So he's said so many things publicly to diminish to mock horror at the Nazis. So he's effectively often acted as a Nazi apologist. And so in combination with that long history, then doing it on the Tucker Carlson show, right? That's what lit the fuse, right? If he'd never said any of these things, trying to minimize disgust and horror at the Nazis, if he hadn't effectively operated as a Nazi apologist for years, then it wouldn't be as big a deal. But he has a long track record in saying things in favor of the Nazis, and so when he came along and did it on Tucker Carlson's show, that lit the fuse. So if he was just content to stay in his cave, then there wouldn't have been this widespread opposition. But he came out of the cave onto Tucker's show, and then Tucker said he was the greatest historian around today.
Right. I have dozens of things that my brain like makes bookmarks and wants to find more information about. But one of the things that I haven't got around to, maybe you'll know more about it, was back in 39 during the height of, Hitler paranoia or whatever. They had that SS St. Louis that took off for America, and nobody would let it land in America, and it had to go back to Europe and deal with, Hitler or whoever. And it was like 1,000 Jews, give or take. I know what times we live in now. We're super liberal now. What was different? What was different in 1939 where they couldn't find anybody to kick out a welcome mat along the eastern coast?
They could find someone to kick out a welcome mat, and the people on the ship didn't want to go there. So that's what's rarely told in this story. They were welcomed by the Dominican Republic, but the people on the ship didn't want to go there. They preferred to go back to Europe than to make a life in the Dominican Republic.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes sense. But it still says there must have been something different in the air in 1939, at least in America. Now you've shed some new light on this. They were given a chance. So anything that happens after that, hell, that's a roll of the dice of fate that they took on themselves, right? Whoever was leader amongst them had a chance to say, we'll start a life here in the DR. That's what you're telling me, right, Luke?
Yeah, that's never brought up, right? So the United States had high unemployment, right? It had all sorts of reasons to be scared about having increasing divisions in society. And the United States had all sorts of reasons for immigration restriction. And there was a country that was happy to take them. But it wasn't good enough for the people on the St. Louis. They would rather return to Europe and take their chances. And this is never mentioned. And it's quite dishonest.
Right. Earlier tonight you were talking about basically the fact that the U.S. is corporatizing vice. And should we really be all that surprised, Luke, that we're going to commodify it just like we've commodified everything else? You remember when the doctors used to say 4 out of 5, doctors think you should be smoking Parliament cigarettes. That's we're just of that. We're just of that. So it kind of is like par for the course that now they're going to commodify vice. Yeah, I detected that early on in our get-togethers that you weren't crazy about weed, and I've seen plenty of people that probably shouldn't even be around weed. So you got something there. But believe it or not, some smart people have an affinity for weed. It finds a niche there, and it also finds a niche among the dummies, and it finds a niche among plenty of people who shouldn't be going there. They got other things they should be dealing with. Because I've told you the one thing I will admit as far as the weed is it seems to promote apathy. Your to-do list gets a lot longer and the shit I just done list gets a lot shorter. So, I'll give the devil his dues in that area. But you also was talking about comedy. And I will say, my personality, it changed after I became kind of an ascetic mystic back in 2007. But before then, I had developed a real quick wit. And where it came from was avoiding ass whippings from my dad. And that comedy is magical in that way, that you can take someone that's in an emotion that's not good and you can flip them on a dime. And that's magic. So have you ever noticed, comedy, that kind of probably goes back to like the court gestures and all that, being the folks who supposedly could speak truth to power. I doubt that, Luke. But what do you think about comedy and that magical ability that it has?
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I may have gotten a fact wrong. It may not have been the Dominican Republic that allowed them in because I just want to say that I do believe that they had an option and they didn't want to go there. Okay, so
You better watch out if Kimadov is in the chat. You got a damn resident fact checker from hell. I mean, he's unbeatable. I tell you what, these fucking pollsters, they need to be looking up Kimadov, hire him for some of that stuff. You know what I mean? Try to get something by that guy. You know what I'm saying? I
agree that that humor usually seems to, according to what I've read, come from a dark place and from navigating a painful home situation.
Right. Or, could be a neighborhood where you're avoiding a different kind of ass kicking, from the bullies or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it takes, it's developed sometimes out of necessity. And at least that was the case for me. I was going to say, I had no idea about this, but apparently the male demographic, the middle-aged male, is the key demographic for like advertisers or whatever. And since the election, I guess Mr. Colbert and Mr. Fallon and Mr. Kimmel all together are barely drawing like 550,000 men aged 25 to 54, that key demo that they care so much about. Now, I know that's not everybody, but it's a pretty good segment. And Kimmel, he's down to like 170,000. And Colbert, the top dog, was like just over 200,000. But Gutfeld, which, I mean, I don't even have cable. I wouldn't even know how to find him. But Gutfeld apparently in a smaller demo, 35 to 54, does over 500,000 a night. What do you think about that?
I think that's great because the normal nighttime shows, they're so predictably left wing that it's cool that there's a right wing alternative and that's more male friendly.
Yeah. So that's well, it's good to see. I mean, I knew I had like checked in to see like who even watches TV. I had checked in months back, and I think maybe NBC and CBS, they get like 5 million eyeballs a night, whereas ABC has dropped off to like 3 million eyeballs, watching it. Now, what I don't know if that's how many's average, or is that the most or if that's who's tuning in for the evening news or whatever. But whatever it is, they do not do the numbers like they did when we were coming up. They are just a shell of that. But apparently there's enough room for Gutfeld to come in and not match them, but close to it. And if they gave an apple to apple on the demo, hell, he might be matching them. It's that close. So,
sometimes he's the highest rating comedy. Much of the time, he's the highest rating comedy show in the evenings.
I was going to say sometimes you show, I don't know what you call that, the sizzle reel or whatever for that. Who's that? Jesse. His name's Jesse.
Yeah, Jesse Waters.
He's got the bad sizzle reel. Whoever the little snot-nosed young guy that gets his sizzle reel together for him, whatever the first part of the show, It's better than all the other shows, is it not?
It's pretty good. Yeah.
Whatever you would call that 60-second intro. Yeah. Most of the time, I'm like, man, I hope Luke's going to show about that. I hope he shows this other thing. Nobody else has intros that make you do that, not even Megyn Kelly, and she's cute and got nice legs. I was going to ask you a little bit about that 14th century Jewish IQ event. And, we were talking about they had lots of genetic problems, but they apparently had that high IQ. And, of course, some of the things I was thinking about is like Maimonides and Spinoza. What I think about is the most celebrated Jews. They're not even of that kind. You know what I'm saying? They're the Sephardic kind. So it got me thinking, what could have done that? Because in genetics, they talk about, regression to the mean. And I know you talked about if you got pretty parents, you're bound to have pretty kids. That's true. But apparently the geneticists say they're not going to be, Tom Cruise and his pretty wife aren't going to have kids that are quite as pretty as they are. You know, the nose or whatever is not going to be quite as good. But and then if you think about that, you were talking about 14th century, so that's like 600-700 years ago. What do you think could explain that? You know, because I'm right along with you. I remember.
Okay, so there was an eight generation, within about 8 generations, there was, for the first time in history, there was a widely noted social phenomenon that Jews had above average intelligence. So until about the 14th century, you did not have this noted in history. 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, Jews weren't known for being particularly smart. Then suddenly in the 14th century, you have the emergence of these Ashkenazi European Jews who apparently had immigrated out of the Middle East through Italy around the year 1000, and there was some intermarrying with other women. But what starts the virtuous cycle that leads to higher intelligence is that they have a tenuous hold on existence. And so if they're particularly smart, they get to feed their kids and they get to have kids. And if they're not smart, then they don't get to have kids and they don't get to feed their families. So they go into money lending and other related white collar professions. And the smart ones have kids and the dumb ones either convert to Christianity or are not able to reproduce. So if only the smart, capable ones are making enough money to have kids, then you're going to have a natural selection bias in favor of intelligence, and those of mediocre intelligence either converted to Christianity or they were not able to make a living lending money, and so they couldn't feed their kids. And lending money is a very high IQ operation. You have to be really smart to do it effectively. And so it was a tremendous pruning device that separated the intellectual wheat from the chaff.
Mm-hmm. You talk about lending money. I used to have the ability to lend out, you know, up to a certain amount, you know, up to 250,000 in a time before credit scores. But, you know, like a lot of things, you can probably name a few things here, too, that as time went away, they took the human element out of that, you know, and instead of like we used to use, we called it the seesaw method. You looked at the collateral, the stability, their ability to pay, and their willingness to pay. And you just like get very analytical about it and try to be dispassionate, you know, try to take the person out of it and just look at them. They don't do that anymore. Now a computer looks at it. You know, have you noticed how many things since you came up in the 70s, they took the human, they took the human element for error or to like, you know, compensating factors. They've taken that all away.
Right, more and more because it's simply more effective. I mean, that's why there are protocols. You have a safer plane trip and you have a safer operation if pilots and surgeons follow protocols. And so you have protocols in more and more of life. And usually people follow protocols in their daily life, and usually people will be more effective if they follow protocols rather than just do what they decide to do. And yeah, there are many examples, I'm sure, where algorithms are consistently much more accurate and effective than individual judgment. For example, AI tends to find out what a person's health problem is much more accurately than regular doctors, according to one study.
Right.
So I'm fine with whatever works. If AI is more effective than doctors, then bring in AI. For example, it bugs me watching baseball and human umpires, they only get about less than 90% of balls and strikes calls correct. And we have the technology where we could have 100% correct balls and strikes calls using computers. And so it bugs me. You're watching a baseball game. I only watch the playoff games, and a ball that's clearly a ball misses the strike zone by 5 inches and it gets called a strike. It's infuriating if that goes against your team. When we have the technology to circumvent that, I would prefer accurate calls of balls and strikes. So I would prefer computers doing it rather than humans who don't even get 9 out of 10 correct.
I tell you what I would rather see. I would rather see let the umpire stand back there. Okay, let him stand back there. Let the computer call the balls and the strikes. And if for some reason it's off, he can override it. Doesn't that sound like a better solution, Luke?
There's definitely a better solution than what we've got right now, and so I'm fine with bringing in a computer to all those parts of life where it makes more accurate, more effective presentation.
I follow when we're talking about that IQ event. I follow what you're saying for the children of the moneylender. I get that, I understand that, but they couldn't all be moneylenders, could they? You know.
Well, they were pretty much all in similar professions. So they were in diamonds and money lending, and I'd have to Google it, but it was most Ashkenazi men from the 15th century on were in white collar professions.
Right. A thinking man's job, so to speak. That was one thing. I was always jealous of someone like you that was working. You said you were doing some landscaping. Because my mind, when I would go out on lunch and I would see a guy like you doing landscape, I would look at that guy and go, man, I wish I could be that guy. Because in his mind, he may be planting something, but in his mind, he's able to do anything he wants. You know what I mean? He's not stuck in the moment like with the jobs I had. So I was always jealous of the guy that was out there. The main guy I was most jealous of is the guy holding the damn sign, you know, telling you to come on and don't come on, holding the traffic signs. But anyway, we always want the lifestyle that we don't have. You ever notice that?
And because when I was working outside of the summer, so I actually took a semester largely off college because I so enjoyed landscaping. But then I felt the opposite. I felt like I wasn't really human. And so everyone else was getting on with their life, getting college education. And I was working on landscaping at Chico State University. And all the college kids around me. And I just felt so excluded. It was just an awful feeling. And I remember, it was just awful. Yeah.
It wasn't true, but you can't tell your head. Once your head gets something in it that this is the way things are, then all you can hear is the stomping of everybody getting 100 miles ahead of you, 200 miles ahead of you. Now they're 500 miles ahead of you in the game of life, you know. And then it just gets louder in your head, you know, at that point. So if your head works the way mine does, I was going to say, moving on to something else, you know, culture. I'm from the school that I don't think culture organically springs forth. I think I believe more like a Mike Benz, that for most things they have a department, and if they don't have a department, they have a guy that's over there in the record business or whatever. He knows what the corporations are looking for. You know what I mean? And he does whatever needs to be done to groom them, keep them on message, and create them if he needs to, so that they will, you know, say the right thing. What do you think about this idea that do you think culture is organic, or do you think that there's a lot more culture creation going on, Luke?
Well, I would say that most of the things that we think are not from ourselves, right? Almost everything we think comes from outside of us. And so I'm sure there is both an organic component of culture and also the operation of coercion by people who have power. Everybody tries to change the world and make it more like their particular hero system. So I looked up Ashkenazi Jewish economic activity in the Middle Ages. So it was primarily money, lending, and trade. So they were often acted as middlemen between rural and urban areas. They had extensive trading networks across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, and they lent money.
One thing you failed to mention, when I think of Jews, I think of them as being on the edge of this culture and that culture. So you're going to be dealing with people who probably speak multiple languages. That generally you get a higher IQ from someone that's having to converse in 3 or 4 tongues too. Don't you think that plays something in there, Luke?
Right. I think it's a manifestation of the higher IQ. So for me, a fun way that I spend my spare time is that I do live streams about provocative issues that that most people would not find fun to talk about publicly. So it's a function of my own genetic cognitive predispositions.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes, there are get-togethers where people talk about, this and that. They shit on the Jews. They don't give them any upside. And for me, what I notice is they never mention the quirkiness about the Jews that says they're not sinister. Just like what you're talking about. Jews, like you, I don't really, you're not like a full-blooded, you are a Jew, but you're not a Jew. They just have intellectual hobbies that don't make them evil. You get what I'm saying? It makes them different in that they can't be pacified intellectually by a baseball game, a football game, or whatever, like most Gentiles, but it doesn't necessarily make them evil. But I notice as soon as someone, let's say like a Jew, doesn't fit into that norm, well, it's subversive right off the bat. Now, on one hand, I do think Jews are overrepresented in the subversive department, but see, I have to think about it. Is it because they're subversive, or is it because they have these intellectual curiosities? You see, you got to put more into the equation. You get what I'm saying, Luke?
Yeah, the more you live in an abstract world, the more likely you are to believe in crazy things. And if you're smart, you get a lot of payoff from spending a great deal of time in an abstract world, but there are dangers. You'll be into all sorts of stupid things.
Right. Now, talking about finishing up on this culture, I just think that we think of Nick Saban as a football coach and Shaq as a basketball player and The Rock as a wrestler or whatever. But I really think their function is probably more cultural, and they will they'll pay them the big bucks, probably more than they ever paid them doing whatever it is that made them famous, just for staying on message, just for staying popular among the people. And that's the strange thing. You think that's unique to America, or you think that's the world over? You think every soccer player in every country has the same liberty of, say, a Shaq and a Rock, to where they can just write their own ticket as long as they don't screw up?
Well, it's part of business. So they're in the entertainment business, whether it's a soccer player in Saudi Arabia or in England or a football player in America. They're all in the entertainment business. And so you want to say and do as few things in public that will diminish the economics of your particular business. So they're effectively speech codes. If you want to be making money in any business, right? You want to maximize people who are going to buy into your product.
Mm-hmm. I don't think you agree with me here, but I was thinking about earlier this week. I was thinking about Nietzsche's transvaluation of values, and it was in essence a systematized destruction of all systems. And I think about that systematized destruction of all systems, and it seems like those crazy ass young Marxists, they sure as hell were trying that. And that's why I tell you, I think we're living in a strange time, Luke. Sort of like we're just kind of among the rubble of systems that, although they still stand, they're like a hollow husk, in many cases of what they were. And you and I have talked about it. Even the people themselves are probably not as smart as they used to be, kind of incapable of fixing anything. But the machine is still fine, for fleecing, I guess, what's left. So I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this, Luke. You don't see it. You don't see it that all the institutions, they're no longer serviceable. You don't see this, right?
Well, people were saying the same thing in 1808 and 1908 and 1958, because institutions and traditions, they change, they become more or less useful, they become supplanted by other traditions and folkways. So this is how it's always been. There was a tremendous panic about comic books 100 years ago, and there was a panic about TV well, there was a tremendous panic about book printing 600 years ago.
You're saying, maybe you're saying I pay too much attention to the performative nature of a stupid ass Supreme Court justice that says she can't define a woman. You're saying I'm paying too much attention to that.
No, I'm saying that you're not keeping it in proportion, that there have always been people who said stupid things, and there have always been negative and positive trends in society, and there have always been traditions that are weakening or growing stronger, and there have always been new ways of doing things that have come up, and most fail, but sometimes the new ways are better than the old ways.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. You remember years ago, they used to have something called the Eleusinian Mystery Initiations. You remember that? You know, they don't, it's something they weren't really allowed to talk about, so we have to do a little bit of speculation, but probably some hallucinogens or some strong libations that were used to maybe pitch them out of their normal state of being. And like, since we don't have any like genetic bonds anymore, what they used to call in the old days, Asabiyyah, or what was that word?
Asabiyyah, the sense of community.
Asabiyyah. Yeah. Since we don't have that sense, what do you think? How do you think can get everybody to back together? Because
cohesion, social cohesion. So stop immigration. That's a good place to begin.
Oh, you're saying number one there, but
yeah.
But in your mind, so much of the stuff on the left is so far off the reservation. Where can you or I break bread with these people? You know?
Oh, there are many ways. You'll find that if you simply open yourself up to it, you'll recognize, if you are able to have a good conversation with someone on the left, you'll recognize that often they make very good points, and there are going to be all sorts of areas where you're going to recognize that they're right and you're wrong, and you just didn't see things the way that you just hadn't heard that particular perspective. So there are very smart people on the left, but in general, it's a lot easier not to talk politics with people from across the aisle, but there are a lot of other things that you can talk about, such as your kids, sports, business, the weather, volunteering. Normally talking politics with strangers or people at work is a bad idea.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Can I leave you with maybe a Nietzsche quote? I got a couple that I've been thinking on today. One of them is philosophy, as I have so far understood and lived it, means living voluntarily among ice and high mountains, seeking out everything strange and questionable in existence, everything so far placed under a ban by morality and culture. The ice is near, the solitude tremendous, but how serenely all things lie in the light, how freely one breathes, how much one feels lies beneath oneself. What do you think about that? Does that do anything for you, Luke?
Yeah, it's gorgeous. He had a gift with the aphorisms.
Yeah, he did. Was it good enough for me to give you one more before we close?
Sure.
Okay, let's do one more. The finest virtue of all of the great thinker is the magnanimity with which, as a man of knowledge, he intrepidly, often with some embarrassment, often with sublime mockery, offers himself and his light as the supreme sacrifice. That's a good place to close, because, me being sort of an ascetic type, I told you I gave myself over to something. And, I guess it takes somebody like Nietzsche to really understand something like that, because he really has a good way of breaking that stuff down. But it's been good talking to you tonight, Luke. Appreciate you.
Take care, man. Good
See you,
to
buddy.
catch up with you. See you.
Bye-bye.
There's a New Zealand psychologist, James Flynn, who lived in Virginia for a year, and he was an expert in IQ. And on his cul-de-sac, there was a Chinese family, a Jewish family, and a black family. And after dinner at night, the kids in the Chinese family would settle down and do their homework. In the Jewish family, after dinner, the kids and the parents would yell at each other, and then the kids would settle down and do their homework. And then in the black family, after dinner, the family would go outside and play basketball. So you're probably wondering what's going on with Israel. So might get to a perspective on Bibi Netanyahu and the deep state in just a minute. But first, a little more from Mark Halperin.
Suggests no one has hit the nail on the head quite yet. Might the answer be that he couldn't trust Trump? That Trump may have even told him, I'm going to take care of Hunter, but he couldn't rely on that. He sees Kash Patel come in, Pam Bondi come in, and decides, like, screw everybody. I was run out of here on a rail. I'm going to protect my family. Might it be that simple?
That it might be that simple, but it might be a good bit more complicated than that. And in order to protect my book royalty, a potential future book royalty.
All right, Israel update here with Mike Duran from the Hudson Institute and this Gadi bloke, historian in Israel.
With the Feldstein arrests and everything else. And he got kind of philosophical about it. And he drew, a bell curve like this.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, the thing that you have to understand is that Israel's elite comes from the one end of the bell curve, the left end of the bell curve, and its views represent a minority of the population. The majority of the population is in the big part of the bell curve, and that's on all kinds of issues, about two-state solution, religious questions of religion, attitude toward tradition, and so on. And he said, what we are going through right now is that Israel's elite is being replaced. And there's a new elite that's coming up, and is going to replace the old elite. And there's no simple way to go about this, but the old elite is fighting back. So all these issues, the Feldstein, the police, the arrest of the police commissioner, the judicial reform, they're all in one way or another the same conflict, refracted differently. And each side, it has in terms of the issues it grabs hold of, it can have a better case or a worse case at any given moment. But all of these things get magnified enormously because it's this fight over the rise of the new elite, which doesn't exist yet. That's the problem. I think we have the same thing here in America, actually.
That's what I was going to say. It's not a different fight in the United States. It's actually not a different fight in Europe either.
Yeah, and of course behind that also is the whole question of consent of the governed. The people on the old elite side, they don't really believe in consent of the governed. They think the masses are asses, and they shouldn't be given too much room to influence the big decisions of war and peace. And
yeah, those of us who have at least some affiliation to academic work can marvel at the new discourse that these elites have produced, where democracy is most in danger by citizens. The real problem in democracy is citizens, and the question is how to control them so they don't ruin democracy. And if you look at his Israeli judicial jargon, they are never speaking about the will of the majority, only about the tyranny of the majority.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same. It's the same in the United States, where when you look at the people, they are the deplorables. And the question is, how can we run things smoothly from a laptop in Starbucks without all these deplorables getting in the way?
Okay, Mike, we have... you're going to say we're going to move on. I just want to say one thing. I don't love Itamar Ben-Gvir. I find him to be a bit of a clown and a kind of bomb thrower. Not the kind of person that I want to associate with. It's clever of them to focus in on him, because I'm sure lots of Israelis feel the same way, even people in the center right, when they look at Ben-Gvir. The other thing is that it's worth reminding everyone. I said here, this is a fact. I know the Australians and the British have prepared a sanctions package against Ben-Gvir. The Biden administration has been deliberating about whether to become. I'm sorry, the Canadians, the British, and the Australians have prepared a sanctions package. They spark in me reactions that the world needs to hear. But I actually lost my train of thought. I don't know what's going on here. So we'll move on to see about your mood changing. I just want to point out the primacy of military power. Very simple thing. When I started my way as an analyst in the Middle East and academia, and I used to focus more on ideas and diplomacy and so on. I have come to see, especially in the Middle East, but just in general, military affairs, military balance is the number one driver. It's not everything. I don't want to be totally reductive, but it's the number one driver of international politics. And Israel, the big mistake of October 7th is not the intelligence failure. The big mistake is that they did not have the kind of military that can deliver a decisive victory in a short period of time. And Israel got sucked into it, still in it. It got sucked into a war of attrition with Iran, and it has no clear path to victory. This is the problem. This is the number one problem. Everything else is secondary. How does Israel get a military that can deliver a decisive victory in a relatively short period of time? That was Ben Gurion's vision. Ben Gurion, there he is. People always ask me who that figure is. That's a humorous representation of Ben Gurion. Ben Gurion's vision was take the fight to the enemy on his territory. The fight should be quick, and it should end decisively in Israel's favor. It's crucial for all kinds of reasons, including the structure of Israeli society.
But we have also shown that, contrary to this theory, Israel can stand a long war if it needs to. That's a very important thing to our self-image too. So it
can stand a long war as long as the United States doesn't say no.
As it can stand a long war without the United States saying an explicit yes. How's that? Because we did not get an explicit yes for this war. You know,
you didn't. No, you didn't. But that fact showed up the vulnerabilities of Israel. And if there wasn't Benjamin Netanyahu running the government, if it had been Benny Gantz or Ehud Barak or Olmert or any one of these guys, I'm not sure.
You even forgot to mention Lapid.
War is very simple, but you have to work through the complexity to get to the simplicity. This is the same thing of international politics in general. I think, but you have to get to the right simplicity. You have to work through the complexity to get to the right simplicity. So I think I have the right simplicity, and I will explain it. Are you there?
Yeah.
I just got
to tell me where to put the cursor. So I orient people. This is Israel in the down corner. This is the Golan Heights. This is Damascus, which is the capital. And this is the north of Syria that is green.
But look at the dark green in northwest Syria. Sorry for those of you who are not watching this on YouTube or just listening to us. We're in the northwest quadrant up in Idlib. And this is where what are called the Syrian rebels. This is HTS is the main group. They're pushing down to Aleppo and then down further to Hama. This line of cities in western Syria, Aleppo, Hama, Homs, Damascus. That's what the Syrian regime calls vital Syria. That is the heartland of Syria as far as they're concerned. And now the rebels have taken Aleppo, which is the second largest city and the financial center of the country. So this
you always surprise me with that phrase, financial center. You look at Syria, you don't. Financial center is not what comes to mind.
Well, no, London, but it still is the economic hub of the country, such as it is, despite its weakened economy. So it matters to the regime. This is a huge blow to the regime. The key thing here is the regime is backed by Iran and Russia. The HTS is backed by the Turks to one degree or another. The Turks are saying that they have nothing to do with this. I would take that with a big grain of salt. There are analysts out there who are actually taking those claims seriously. I don't take them seriously. I'm not saying that this is actually being run out of Ankara, but HTS could not have done this without a green light from Ankara. And there's lots of signs that they got more than just a green light. Like there were reports, pretty credible reports, that the Assad army couldn't communicate. The headquarters couldn't communicate with the tactical units because of electronic warfare. These are not assets. Electronic warfare assets are not things that HTS has. The Turks have that, and so on. The Turks are also using, behind the HTS campaign against the regime, the Turks are also deploying the Syrian National Army, these are Syrians. They're a Syrian proxy of Turkey. This is Turkey's answer to the Wagner group of the Russians, and they're deploying them to take certain areas that are controlled by the PKK in Syria. PKK being the Kurdish separatists who want to break apart Turkey into two different states, a Turkish state and a Kurdish.
So just to those of our viewers who are not so current on all that, there are Kurds within Syria that are affiliated with a Kurdish faction which is against Erdogan's regime.
Absolutely. It's important to understand, actually, that there are three major enclaves of Kurdish enclaves in Syria. And those enclaves are that those communities, Syrian Kurdish communities, are they speak the same dialect as the Turkish Kurds, which is not, for example, true of Kurds in Iraq. Kurds in Iraq speak a totally different dialect, but they don't feel themselves to be part of the Turkish Kurdish community. All right, so this is Turkey. To get to the simplicity here, this is Turkey versus Russia and Iran. And it's not a zero-sum conflict. The Turks are not trying to destroy Iran. They're not trying to destroy Russia. They are trying to achieve their goals in Syria, their national interests in Syria. There are two primary interests that they have. One is to defeat all of the efforts of the Kurds of the PKK in Syria to create an autonomous Kurdish region or regions on Turkey's border. Now, that's one thing they want to do. Second thing they want to do is they want to return all of the refugees. There are some 5 million Syrian refugees in Turkey. It's become a major domestic political issue. President Erdogan has taken a principled position on this, saying that we owe it to these people to host them. His opponents in the presidential election, called for returning them. There's enormous pressure on the Turkish government to return the refugees, but they have to create the conditions in Syria that will allow the return. The Turks have been trying to get some satisfaction from the Assad government and the Russians on this issue, and they haven't gotten it. Those rebels they're supporting also want to topple. Their end game is to topple Bashar al-Assad completely and get rid of the Assad regime.
To what extent does Turkey support getting rid of Assad?
That's an impossible question to answer, because their proxies want to topple Assad. Turkey historically has called for the end of the Assad regime. Now they want political reform. Exactly what they would accept, what the Turkish government would accept in the end, it might accept some kind of something short of that, but it's tied to those groups that want to topple Assad. That's an ambiguous question. There are the official statements of the Turkish government, and there are the clear priorities that they have, which are prevent Syria from being a base for Kurdish separatist operations against Turkey and returning the refugees. Now, the bottom line here is that this all works in Israel's favor, because this is a huge blow to Iran, and because the Russians and the Iranians worked together to prop up Assad, and the Russians brought in the air power, but the ground forces were brought in by the Iranians, including Hezbollah. So all of this was made possible by the near destruction of Hezbollah, or the severe degrading of Hezbollah by the Israelis. That created the vacuum that the Turks are exploiting here. So I see this. I have always seen Turkey and Israel as the key allies of the United States in the Middle East. There are lots in the pro-Israel community who do not agree with me about this. It's a common argument. I'm sure you've heard me have it with people, I presume.
You had it on my Israeli podcast with Dan Shiftan.
Oh, with Dan Shiftan, yeah, that's amazing, because Dan Shiftan is a realist. He sees Turkey as an enemy of Israel. He sees advances by the Turk as advances for Muslim Brotherhood and jihadism and so on. And there's no doubt these HTS, this group that Turkey is supporting, its roots are in Al Qaeda in Syria. It moved away from the global jihad, but these are political Islamists. There's no doubt about it. However, they are a political Islamists of a different stripe than Al Qaeda, for sure. One of their members, I don't know if you saw, called up some representative of the Israeli media, I believe it was Khan Radio, and said, "We like Israel. We like Israel. Don't worry," because their number one enemy. Regardless of what they think about Israel, regardless of what they say about Zionism, their 3-meter fight is against the Assad regime and the Iranians. They are the enemy of Iran, and so we need to see this, I think, in that context. There are people, and Gadi, you and I heard some arguments like this when we were together in Israel. There are people in Israel and outside of Israel who dream.
Well, we had a technical problem.